It all began with an envelope. Not just any envelope, but one of those plain white ones that seem harmless until you open them and realize they're about to turn your world upside down. This particular envelope had been slipped under the door of my mom's house on Maplewood Drive early Monday morning. By the time I got the call from her, she was already worked up, her voice shaking as she read the letter aloud. "Violation of Section 8, Paragraph C," she said, pausing for a moment like she couldn't believe what she was saying. "Failure to maintain landscaping in accordance with approved standards. Immediate remediation required within 7 days or risk termination of residency." I could hear the fear in her tone, the kind that comes when someone feels powerless. At 76 years old, my mom wasn't exactly able to keep up with yard work anymore. Her hands, once steady enough to bake pies and sew quilts, now struggled to hold a pair of scissors, let alone trim hedges or pull weeds. Arthritis had taken its toll over the past couple of years, leaving her unable to do much more than water the plants near the front porch. But none of that mattered to Karen Thompson, the head of our neighborhood's homeowners association, HOA. Oh no, Karen didn't care about health issues or age or anything else that might make life difficult for people like my mom. All she cared about were rules. Ridiculous, nitpicky rules, and making sure everyone followed them perfectly. "Don't worry, Mom," I told her, trying to sound calm even though I was fuming inside. "I'll take care of it." What Karen didn't know, and what nobody in the neighborhood suspected, was that I wasn't your average homeowner struggling to pay bills or juggle responsibilities. No, thanks to a string of successful businesses, I was worth millions, more money than most people dream of having. But I'd always kept that part of my life private, preferring to stay out of the spotlight. Still, sometimes circumstances force you to step forward, and this felt like one of those moments. The drive to Maplewood Drive the next day was nostalgic. As I turned onto the street where I'd grown up, memories came flooding back. The tire swing hanging from the big oak tree in the backyard, the lemonade stands we used to set up during summer afternoons, the smell of fresh-cut grass after Dad mowed the lawn every Saturday. It was home in every sense of the word. Or at least, it used to be. Now the house looked tired. Overgrown ivy climbed the siding. Dandelions dotted the yard like yellow stars, and the paint on the shutters was peeling badly. Seeing it like this made my chest ache. This place held so many happy memories, and now it felt like it was slipping away because of some petty rulebook. When I stepped out of my car, I barely had time to take it all in before Karen appeared. She strutted down the sidewalk like she owned the place, wearing designer heels and oversized sunglasses, clutching a clipboard like it was a weapon. Without missing a beat, she knocked on the door before I could even greet her. "Mr. Dawson?" she asked, eyeing me suspiciously. Clearly, she hadn't expected someone who looked like they belonged in a boardroom rather than a suburban fixer-upper. "Yes, that's me," I replied, keeping my voice calm despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "And you must be Mrs. Thompson." She gave me a tight smile, clearly sizing me up. "We've sent multiple notices regarding the property's condition. If these issues aren't resolved promptly, further action will be necessary." Her tone grated on me, condescending and smug, like she thought she was better than us. But instead of snapping back, I simply nodded. "Understood. Let's talk details." Little did she know, I already had a plan forming in my mind. A plan that would not only protect my mom, but also expose the truth about the HOA. The next morning, I woke up with a clear mission in mind. This wasn't just about fixing my mom's yard or dealing with Karen's ridiculous rules. It was about standing up for people like my mom who couldn't fight back on their own. But before I could take any big steps, I knew I had to play along, at least for now. If Karen thought I was simply another homeowner scrambling to comply, she wouldn't suspect what I had planned. I started by hiring a landscaping crew. Within hours, they were at the house trimming bushes, mowing the overgrown grass, and pulling out weeds that had taken over the flower beds. They even repainted the peeling shutters, giving the place a fresh coat of white paint that made it look almost new again. To anyone watching, it probably seemed like I was bending to Karen's demands. And honestly, part of me wanted her to think exactly that. For now. While the workers buzzed around outside, I stayed inside, poring over every document I could find about the HOA. I dug into their bylaws, financial statements, meeting minutes, and membership agreements. It didn't take long to realize something shocking. The HOA wasn't just strict, it was corrupt. Years of mismanagement had left them drowning in debt, relying heavily on outrageous fines and fees to keep things afloat. Contracts for services like lawn care and snow removal went to the same vendors year after year without any competitive bidding, often at inflated prices. Worse still, the reserve fund, money set aside for major repairs and improvements, had been drained to almost nothing. As I pieced everything together, a plan began forming in my mind. If Karen wanted to play hardball, then fine. But she had no idea who she was messing with. Later that afternoon, Karen decided to make an appearance. She strolled up the driveway in her usual polished outfit, clipboard in hand, looking as though she owned the place. Her lips curled into a smug smile when she saw the freshly cut grass and trimmed hedges. "Well, Mr. Dawson," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness, "it seems you finally decided to bring this property up to standard. I must admit, I'm pleasantly surprised." I forced a polite smile, even though her condescending tone made my blood boil. "Just doing my part to keep the neighborhood looking nice," I replied smoothly. "Wouldn't want to disappoint anyone." Her smile faltered slightly, but she quickly recovered. "Good, because if these violations aren't addressed properly, we'll have no choice but to escalate matters further." "Oh, don't worry," I said, keeping my tone light. "I'm sure we won't need to go down that road." Karen raised an eyebrow, clearly suspicious of my confidence. But instead of pressing further, she nodded curtly and turned to leave. As she walked away, I couldn't help but notice how she glanced back at the house one last time, as if checking to see if I'd slip up somehow. Little did she know, I was already 10 steps ahead. That evening, I attended the monthly HOA meeting. When I walked into the community center, dressed in a sharp suit and carrying a leather briefcase, heads turned. Whispers rippled through the room. Who was this guy? Why did he look like he belonged in a corporate boardroom rather than a suburban neighborhood association? Karen greeted me with exaggerated enthusiasm, though her eyes betrayed her unease. "So glad you could join us, Mr. Dawson. We're eager to hear your update on bringing the property up to code." I gave her a polite nod, letting her believe she still held the upper hand. "You'll get your update soon enough," I said coolly. As the meeting began, I sat quietly, observing the dynamics of the group. People nodded along as Karen rattled off updates about upcoming regulations and proposals. Some looked bored, others frustrated, but none dared challenge her authority. It was clear she ruled this little kingdom with an iron fist, silencing dissent before it even began. But I wasn't afraid of Karen, not anymore. I had spent years building successful businesses, navigating tough negotiations, and taking risks that paid off in ways most people only dreamed of. If there was one thing I knew how to do, it was turn the tables when someone underestimated me. And Karen, she had no idea what was coming. By the end of the meeting, I had gathered more than enough ammunition. The financial mismanagement, the lack of transparency, the favoritism. It was all there, waiting to be exposed. All I needed was the right moment to strike. For now, I bided my time, letting Karen bask in her false sense of control. Because sometimes, the best way to win a battle is to let your opponent think they're winning, until it's too late. The days following the HOA meeting were a whirlwind of activity. Outside, the landscaping crew continued their work, transforming my mom's yard into something that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. The once overgrown grass was now neatly trimmed, the flower beds vibrant with freshly planted blooms, and the peeling shutters gleamed under a fresh coat of paint. Karen drove by at least twice a day, her designer sunglasses hiding whatever thoughts were running through her head. Each time she slowed down to inspect the progress, I could almost see the gears turning in her mind. She likely assumed I was scrambling to comply, desperate to avoid further conflict. But inside the house, I was anything but compliant. My laptop became my weapon, and I spent hours poring over every document related to the HOA. Financial reports, meeting minutes, vendor contracts. It all painted a picture of an organization teetering on the edge of collapse. What shocked me most wasn't just the mismanagement. It was the sheer audacity of it. Funds earmarked for neighborhood improvements had been funneled into questionable expenses. Contracts for services like snow removal and landscaping went to the same vendors year after year, often at prices far above market rates. And then there was the reserve fund, a critical safety net meant for emergencies that had dwindled to almost nothing. Armed with this information, I decided it was time to attend another HOA meeting. When I walked into the community center that evening, dressed in a tailored suit and carrying a leather briefcase, heads turned. Whispers rippled through the room. Who was this guy? Why did he look like he belonged in a corporate boardroom rather than a suburban neighborhood association? Karen greeted me with exaggerated enthusiasm, though her eyes betrayed her unease. "So glad you could join us, Mr. Dawson," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "We're eager to hear your update on bringing the property up to code." I gave her a polite nod, letting her believe she still held the upper hand. "You'll get your update soon enough," I replied coolly. As the meeting began, I sat quietly, observing the dynamics of the group. People nodded along as Karen rattled off updates about upcoming regulations and proposals. Some looked bored, others frustrated, but none dared challenge her authority. It was clear she ruled this little kingdom with an iron fist, silencing dissent before it even began. When it came time for open discussion, I raised my hand. Karen hesitated for a moment before calling on me, clearly unprepared for what was coming next. "Before we proceed," I began, standing up and addressing the room, "I'd like to bring something important to everyone's attention. Many of you may not realize this, but our HOA is facing significant financial challenges. Based on my review of publicly available records, it appears that funds intended for maintenance have been misallocated, resulting in deficits that are now being covered by excessive fines and fees." Gasps filled the room. Karen's face went pale, but she quickly recovered, attempting to brush off my claims as baseless accusations. "That's absurd," she snapped, her voice sharp. "Our finances are completely transparent." "Transparent?" I countered, pulling out printed documents. "Then perhaps you'd like to explain why the reserve fund has dwindled to almost nothing over the past 5 years, or why certain vendors consistently receive inflated contracts without competitive bidding." The crowd murmured uneasily. Sensing their growing unease, I pressed on. "And let's not forget the recent proposal to install high-end security cameras throughout the neighborhood, a project estimated to cost $500,000. Where do you expect that money to come from, Karen? More fines? Higher dues?" By now, the entire room was buzzing with outrage. People demanded answers, and Karen struggled to regain control. But the damage was done. Her carefully constructed empire was crumbling before her eyes. After the meeting, several neighbors approached me, thanking me for exposing the truth. Others admitted they'd suspected something was wrong, but never had the courage to speak up. Together, we formed a coalition determined to reform the HOA from the ground up. Meanwhile, Karen tried desperately to salvage her reputation. She called emergency meetings, circulated propaganda emails, and even attempted to smear mine by accusing me of having ulterior motives. But her tactics only backfired, alienating her remaining supporters. To ensure lasting change, I proposed a series of sweeping reforms. Term limits for leadership positions, mandatory audits of financial records, and a cap on fines and fees. The motion passed unanimously, effectively stripping Karen of her power. Still, I wasn't done yet. There was one final move I had up my sleeve, and Karen had no idea what was coming. The fallout from the explosive HOA meeting was immediate and electric. Word spread quickly through Maplewood Drive like wildfire, igniting conversations over backyard fences, at mailboxes, and during morning coffee runs. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves were suddenly exchanging knowing glances or whispering about Karen's downfall. For years, people had quietly resented her iron-fisted rule, but never dared to challenge it, until now. Karen tried to fight back, of course. She called an emergency meeting just 2 days later, hoping to regain control of the narrative. When I arrived, she was already seated at the front of the room, flanked by a few loyal supporters who looked as nervous as she did. Her usual air of confidence seemed shaky, replaced by something closer to desperation. As more residents filed in, filling every chair and spilling into standing room-only spaces, I could see the panic flickering in her eyes. "This is highly irregular," she began, tapping her pen against the table in an attempt to project authority. "But given recent developments, I felt it necessary to address some concerns directly." I leaned back in my seat, letting her dig herself deeper. She launched into a rambling defense of her leadership, claiming that all financial decisions were made in the best interest of the community, and insisting that any perceived mismanagement was simply a misunderstanding. Her voice grew louder as she spoke, betraying her growing unease. When it came time for questions, hands shot up across the room. One neighbor asked why the reserve fund had been depleted without notice. Another questioned why the same landscaping company received contracts year after year, despite complaints about their work. Each question chipped away at Karen's facade, exposing cracks in her carefully constructed image. Finally, it was my turn. I stood slowly, ensuring all eyes were on me before I spoke. "Thank you, Karen, for addressing these issues," I said calmly, though my tone carried an edge. "But let's be honest, the real problem here isn't misunderstandings. It's accountability, or rather, the lack of it." I pulled out copies of the documents I'd gathered and handed them to a few key members of the audience. "These records show exactly where our money has gone. And it's not toward improving this neighborhood. Instead, we've seen inflated contracts, unnecessary expenses, and a shocking disregard for transparency. Does anyone here think that's acceptable?" The room erupted in murmurs. Some people nodded vigorously. Others looked shocked, as if they hadn't realized how bad things had gotten. Karen's face turned bright red, and she stammered, trying to defend herself. But her excuses sounded hollow, even to her own ears. To make matters worse for her, I revealed my next move, a proposal for sweeping reforms. Term limits for board members, mandatory third-party audits of finances, and strict caps on fines and fees. These changes would ensure no single person could dominate the HOA ever again. The motion passed unanimously, leaving Karen visibly shaken. Afterward, several neighbors approached me, thanking me for shining a light on the truth. Some admitted they'd long suspected corruption, but didn't know how to prove it, or feared retaliation if they spoke out. Others expressed relief that someone was finally standing up to Karen. A small group of us agreed to form a committee to oversee the transition to new leadership, ensuring the reforms stuck. Meanwhile, Karen tried one last desperate play. She circulated a letter accusing me of having hidden agendas and suggested I was only stirring up trouble because I hated rules. It was laughable, really. If anything, my goal was to restore fairness and integrity to the neighborhood, not tear it apart. Her smear campaign backfired spectacularly. By attacking me, she alienated what little support she had left. Even her closest allies began distancing themselves, unwilling to be associated with her sinking ship. Within days, Karen resigned from her position, citing personal reasons. No one shed a tear when she packed up her clipboard and walked out of the community center for the last time. As the dust settled, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. And while Karen's reign of terror might have ended, there was still work to be done. The neighborhood needed healing, and I planned to use every resource at my disposal to make sure it happened. Because sometimes the best way to fix a broken system is to rebuild it from the ground up. And that's exactly what I intended to do. With Karen out of the picture, the neighborhood began to breathe again. It was as if a heavy cloud had lifted, and for the first time in years, people felt free to speak their minds without fear of retribution. The HOA meetings, once tense and suffocating, became lively discussions where neighbors shared ideas instead of biting their tongues. But I knew that removing Karen wasn't enough. Real change required more than just new leadership. It needed action. That's when I decided to take things a step further. Using part of my fortune, I funded a massive revitalization effort for Maplewood Drive. My goal wasn't just to improve the neighborhood, but to create something that would benefit everyone, especially those who had been overlooked under Karen's regime. I started with small projects: fixing potholes on the streets, installing brighter streetlights, and planting trees along the sidewalks. These changes might have seemed minor, but they made a big difference. Neighbors noticed immediately, and smiles returned to faces that had long been weighed down by frustration. But the biggest project was yet to come. One evening, I called a community meeting to share my vision. When I stood up to speak, the room fell silent. Everyone leaned forward, curious about what I had to say. I want to propose something that will not only enhance our neighborhood, but also provide support for some of its most cherished members, our seniors. I began. I'd like to build an assisted living facility right here on Maplewood Drive. The room erupted in murmurs. Some people nodded approvingly, while others exchanged skeptical glances. Assisted living facilities weren't exactly common in suburban neighborhoods, and I could tell some residents were worried about how it might affect property values. Before anyone could voice their concerns, I continued. This won't be just any facility, I explained. It will offer affordable housing options, top-notch medical care, and amenities designed specifically for seniors. Think of it as a place where our older neighbors can live comfortably and independently, surrounded by friends and family. And best of all, it will create jobs and opportunities for everyone in the community. To ease fears about funding, I assured them the project would be privately financed through a charitable foundation I had set up. There would be no additional costs to homeowners or increases in HOA fees. By the end of my presentation, many of the skeptics seemed convinced, or at least willing to give it a chance. Karen, however, was not pleased. She showed up uninvited to the next meeting, determined to derail the plan. Her sharp heels clicked against the floor as she marched to the front of the room, her clipboard clutched tightly in her hands. "This is unacceptable," she declared, her voice shrill. "An assisted living facility will ruin the character of our neighborhood. Property values will plummet, and no one will want to live here anymore." Her words sparked a heated debate. Some residents echoed her concerns, but many more spoke out in favor of the idea. One woman stood up, tears in her eyes, and shared how difficult it had been caring for her aging parents without proper resources nearby. Another man talked about his grandmother, who had recently moved to a distant nursing home because there were no suitable options locally. When the discussion finally died down, we held a vote. The majority supported moving forward with the project, leaving Karen seething in defeat. As she stormed out of the room, I couldn't help but smile. For someone who claimed to care so much about the neighborhood, she sure didn't seem interested in helping the people who lived there. Construction began a few months later, and the transformation was remarkable. The vacant lot that had once been an eyesore became a hub of activity, with workers laying foundations, painting walls, and landscaping gardens. Neighbors stopped by daily to watch the progress, their excitement growing with each passing week. When the facility officially opened its doors, it was met with overwhelming enthusiasm. Seniors moved in, families visited often, and the entire neighborhood felt more connected than ever before. As for Karen, she quietly put her house on the market and moved away, unable to stomach the changes she had tried so hard to prevent. Rumor had it she relocated to a gated community where she hoped to rebuild her reign of terror. Good riddance, I thought. Maplewood Drive didn't need her kind of leadership. Not anymore. With the assisted living facility complete and the neighborhood thriving, I finally allowed myself to relax. Sitting on the porch of my mom's old house one evening, sipping lemonade and listening to the sounds of laughter drifting through the air, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Sometimes, fighting back isn't about revenge. It's about justice. And in this case, justice tasted pretty sweet. The grand opening of the assisted living facility was a day to remember. The sun shone brightly, casting golden light over Maplewood Drive as neighbors gathered to celebrate. Balloons bobbed in the breeze, and a small band played cheerful tunes near the entrance. Laughter filled the air, mingling with the sound of clinking glasses during the ribbon-cutting ceremony. It felt like the entire neighborhood had come together, not just to mark the occasion, but to embrace a new chapter for our community. My mom was one of the first residents to move in. She settled into her cozy apartment with ease, surrounded by friendly staff and welcoming neighbors who stopped by to chat. Watching her unpack her belongings, arrange photos on the walls, and decorate her space with familiar knickknacks brought tears to my eyes. For years, I'd worried about how she would manage living alone, especially as her health declined. Now, seeing her happy and cared for eased a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. But the best part, she wasn't alone. The facility quickly became a hub of activity, drawing seniors from all over town. Residents formed book clubs, gardening groups, and even a weekly bingo night that drew crowds of visitors. Kids played games on the lawn outside, while families hosted barbecues under the shade of newly planted trees. The once empty lot had transformed into the heart of Maplewood Drive, a place where generations connected and friendships blossomed. Karen, predictably, tried to sabotage the project until the very end. She circulated petitions claiming the facility would lower property values and sent anonymous letters urging people to protest. But her efforts only backfired. Instead of rallying support, she alienated herself further. Neighbors grew tired of her negativity and constant attempts to stir up trouble. When she finally listed her house for sale, no one shed a tear. In fact, some joked that they should throw a block party to celebrate her departure. As Karen packed up her belongings and loaded them into a moving truck, I couldn't resist stepping outside to watch. She avoided eye contact, her jaw clenched tightly as she lugged boxes to the curb. Part of me wanted to say something, to remind her that power isn't about control but about serving others. But I decided against it. Letting her walk away quietly felt like poetic justice. Besides, the neighborhood had already moved on. Her name was rarely mentioned anymore, except occasionally in passing, accompanied by a shake of the head or a dismissive laugh. With Karen gone, the HOA flourished under its new leadership. The reforms we implemented ensured transparency and fairness, giving everyone a voice in decisions that affected the community. Monthly meetings were productive and collaborative, with neighbors brainstorming ways to improve life on Maplewood Drive. New initiatives sprang up. A community garden, a free summer concert series, and even a mentorship program pairing older residents with younger ones. People took pride in their neighborhood again, and it showed in every corner, from the freshly painted fences to the vibrant flower beds lining the streets. For me, this experience taught an important lesson. Money can open doors, but real change comes from empowering others. By standing up to Karen and exposing the truth, I gave my neighbors the courage to demand better, not just for themselves, but for future generations. Together, we proved that a community is strongest when it works as a team, supporting one another through challenges and celebrating victories, big and small. One evening, as I sat on the porch swing at my mom's old house, I reflected on everything that had happened. The streetlights glowed softly, illuminating kids riding bikes and couples taking evening strolls. The sound of laughter drifted from the direction of the assisted living facility, where a group of seniors was enjoying a movie night outdoors. It was peaceful, hopeful, a stark contrast to the tension that had once gripped the neighborhood. I thought about Karen, wondering if she'd learned anything from her downfall. Maybe someday she'd realize that true leadership isn't about enforcing rules. It's about building connections and fostering kindness. Until then, Maplewood Drive would continue thriving without her. We had turned a corner, leaving behind fear and division to create something beautiful, a place where everyone belonged. The months that followed the opening of the assisted living facility were nothing short of transformative for Maplewood Drive. What had once been a neighborhood weighed down by fear and frustration became a place alive with energy, connection, and purpose. The change wasn't just visible, it was tangible. Neighbors who had barely known each other's names now greeted one another warmly, sharing stories over coffee or lending a hand when needed. Kids played freely in the streets again, their laughter echoing through the air like music. Even the houses seemed to shine brighter, as if reflecting the renewed spirit of the community. For my mom, life at the assisted living facility was everything I'd hoped it would be, and more. She thrived in her new environment, surrounded by friends and activities that kept her engaged and happy. Her days were filled with card games, art classes, and afternoon walks around the beautifully landscaped grounds. On weekends, our family gathered in the communal dining hall for meals, swapping jokes and reminiscing about old times. It was heartwarming to see her so content, knowing she was exactly where she belonged. But the impact of the facility extended far beyond its walls. Families from across the neighborhood began visiting regularly, drawn not only by the amenities, but also by the sense of belonging it fostered. Parents brought their children to storytime sessions hosted by the residents, while teenagers volunteered to help with technology workshops, teaching seniors how to use smartphones and video call apps. These interactions created bonds that bridged generations, reminding everyone of the value of connection and mutual support. As for Karen, rumors occasionally surfaced about her new life in a gated community miles away. Apparently, she had tried to recreate her reign of control there too. But unsurprisingly, it hadn't gone well. Word was that her strict enforcement of rules and refusal to listen to others had left her isolated once again. While some might have felt sorry for her, I couldn't muster much sympathy. She had chosen her path, and the consequences were hers to bear. Maplewood Drive, meanwhile, had moved on, stronger and more united than ever. One crisp autumn evening, I attended a neighborhood potluck held in the park near the assisted living facility. Strings of twinkling lights hung between trees, casting a warm glow over picnic tables laden with homemade dishes. The smell of roasted chicken, fresh baked pies, and spicy chili filled the air, mingling with the sound of cheerful chatter and laughter. Children ran around playing tag, while adults clustered in groups, catching up on work, school, and weekend plans. Standing there, plate in hand, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for what we had achieved, but for the people who made it possible. Mrs. Patel stopped by to thank me again for spearheading the revitalization efforts, her eyes shining with emotion. Mr. Jenkins joked about starting a petition to rename the street Dawson Drive, which earned a round of applause and plenty of teasing. Even Mrs. Thompson, the elderly woman who lived across from my mom, hobbled over to give me a hug, saying simply, "You've given us all a second chance." That night, as I walked home under a sky dotted with stars, I thought about how far we'd come. From